At exactly 05:00 a.m. on September 6, 2025, 10 Ukrainian drones were just 57 seconds away from Europe's largest nuclear power plant. The Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant, valued at more than $5.7 billion, stood silent under a dense pre-dawn fog. The question that gripped both sides of the front was chilling. Would Ukraine really risk flying drones this close to a nuclear facility? According to several Western defense analysts, cited by Reuters and BBC News, this operation was never meant to trigger catastrophe. It was a precision strike designed to paralyze Russia's control center without touching the reactors. Yet the mere idea of Ukrainian drones breaching one of the most fortified sites in Europe shook military planners across NATO. Could such a small, improvised fleet genuinely challenge a fortress guarded by billion-dollar systems? The operation had been months in the making. Inside a hidden command post near Orikhiv, a Ukrainian drone specialist stared at a flickering monitor. 10 small icons represented KH-7 attack drones, each weighing barely 1.5 pounds each, costing less than $400. Through their cameras, the target was already in view: the Zaporizhzhia plant's training and simulation center, a $50 million facility that served as the brain of the operation. Western observers later compared it to hitting an enemy's nerve center, rather than the heart, a surgical approach designed to cripple, not to kill. Using a 5.8 GHz frequency-hopping control link that changed over 1,000 times per second, the operator guided the swarm beneath the reach of Russia's advanced electronic warfare systems. The Krasuka-4 jammer blanketed the region, and the S-400 Triumph missile system patrolled the skies. On paper, no drone should have survived. But Ukraine's planners, backed by quiet technical consultations with Western experts, had rewritten the rules of engagement. Defense news analysts noted that this mission marked a strategic milestone: the use of artificial intelligence chips, specifically NVIDIA Jetson nanomodules, inside disposable drones. These chips allowed the swarm to navigate autonomously even after GPS jamming, using real-time terrain recognition from stored satellite imagery. The drones no longer depended on remote signals. They were, as one NATO analyst put it, ghosts that see. By the time Russian radar operators at the ZNPP realized something was amiss, the threat had already crossed their electronic fences. NATO intelligence sources later confirmed to DW that the strike had been monitored from a secure observation hub in Poland, providing valuable data on Russia's radar response times. Officially, Washington remained silent, but defense insiders hinted that the event validated years of Western research into asymmetric drone warfare. Within those final 57 seconds, the battle was as much digital as physical. The Ukrainian technician's hands moved steadily over a battered laptop as frequencies shifted, maps updated, and the digital ghosts advanced. He was executing a plan that had cost less than $5,000 against a defensive wall worth over $2 billion. As the drones approached visual range, each camera captured the eerie glow of the plant's reactor domes. The operator's breathing slowed. There was no turning back now. Whether the mission would go down as a surgical success or a nuclear near disaster would depend on the next 3 minutes. Could Ukraine's gamble demonstrate that the balance of power had permanently shifted from missiles to microchips, from brute force to algorithmic precision? The answer and the world's reaction would depend on what happened next beneath the fog in the unseen depths of the Dnipro River. Beneath the fog of the Dnipro River, the real operation was already in motion. While the world watched the skies, the Ukrainians had chosen to swim under the wall rather than fly over it. The key was the Marichka AUV, a sleek, autonomous underwater vehicle no larger than a canoe, but crucial to one of the most daring drone infiltrations in modern warfare. At 04:30 a.m., the Marichka slipped silently into the river from what appeared to be a civilian fishing boat. Beneath the murky water, it moved like a crocodile, slow, unseen, and perfectly silent. Inside its waterproof compartment lay 10 KHS-7 drones, each sealed in carbon fiber pods. The goal was deceptively simple: get within 3 miles of the Zaporizhzhia plant without detection. But every ripple risked alerting the Russian Navy's sonar and the Orlan-10 reconnaissance drones circling above. Western experts interviewed by Defense News later described the operation as the first known hybrid air-underwater drone assault in a live combat zone. The tactic combined Ukraine's growing maritime drone experience tested during the Sevastopol port strikes with small AI-driven aerial swarms. According to Al Jazeera, these methods represented a new phase of warfare where cheap, expendable machines could bypass traditional defenses worth billions. By 04:55 a.m., while the Marichka glided unseen beneath the surface, Ukraine launched 2 modified Neptune missiles not toward the nuclear plant, but toward a Russian BM-30 Smerch rocket system stationed nearby. To a civilian, it was just a loud distraction. To the Ukrainian operator, it was an essential act of deception, eliminating the very system that could shred his drones from the sky once the main assault began. Russia's electronic warfare network responded exactly as planned, by overreacting. Within seconds, the Krasuka 4 system began broadcasting across multiple bands, saturating the airwaves with noise. The powerful S-400 radar arrays rotated, scanning for phantom signatures. Inside a Russian control room, an officer barked orders, unaware that the real threat was crawling toward him from below. Meanwhile, a 5-man Ukrainian Special Forces unit, embedded inside the occupied town of Enerhodar, prepared to strike. These were the ghosts of the operation men who had lived disguised among civilians for weeks. Their task was not to attack, but to open a window to quietly disable a section of the anti-drone net surrounding the facility. Using compact jammers and wire cutters, they created a silent gap wide enough for the drones to pass through undetected. By 05:30 a.m., the Marichka surfaced in a patch of reeds just 3 miles from the plant. A hiss of pressurized air broke the stillness as the hatch opened. One by one, the 10 KHS-7 drones emerged and took flight, vanishing into the mist. Their operator in Orikhiv exhaled a calculated risk, had become a living swarm. 2 of the drones immediately ascended to 500 feet, broadcasting false telemetry. They were the decoys deliberately exposing themselves to draw Russian radar. The other 8 dropped low, hugging the treetops. It was a choreography of deception executed with machine precision. When the Russian S-400 operator detected the 2 ascending blips, he responded by the book, launching missiles worth millions. To him, it was a clean victory. To Ukraine, it was a perfect misdirection. The decoys had done their job. As explosions thundered across the river, the real swarm was already inside the defensive perimeter. The underwater infiltration had succeeded, but the operation's greatest challenge was yet to come: surviving the invisible war of electronic interference and AI adaptation, where every second could mean total mission failure. Could these low-cost, frequency-hopping drones outsmart the most sophisticated electronic shields ever built? The answer would define the next era of warfare. Above the Dnipro basin, the sky turned into a silent battlefield of signals and shadows. By 05:01 a.m., the Russian S-400 Triumph radar locked onto the 2 decoy drones, mistaking them for a full-scale strike. The system, worth nearly $200 million, launched twin missiles in perfect synchronization. Twin streaks of light cut through the night. Inside the Russian command bunker, operators cheered. 2 kills confirmed. But the celebration would last barely a minute. Unseen below radar coverage, the 7 remaining KHS-7 drones had slipped through the cracks, literally hidden inside the radar's own bird filter algorithms. Their carbon fiber frames and sparrow-sized profiles made them invisible to the S-400's logic. They exploited a blind spot baked into Russia's defenses, wrote Military Watch magazine, calling the strike a devastating lesson in digital humility. Each drone's brain, a Jetson Nano AI chip originally designed for student robotics projects, was running an adaptive flight algorithm that changed radio frequencies 1,000 times per second. Even as the Krasuka 4 jammer flooded the air with static, the drones responded like living organisms, hopping from channel to channel faster than the jammer could adapt. It's like trying to catch a hummingbird with radar meant for eagles, a NATO electronic warfare analyst told Defense News. For Ukraine, this wasn't just a daring raid, it was a live-fire experiment in algorithmic warfare. Pentagon sources cited by Reuters later confirmed that American defense researchers had been quietly observing the strike to study how autonomous micro-drones could bypass conventional air defense. Though the White House under President Donald Trump offered no public comment, Washington insiders hinted that the operation had accelerated NATO's electronic warfare modernization by at least 2 years. Inside the Ukrainian command post, the operator's screen flickered as interference from the Krasuka surged. Video feeds glitched, freezing for milliseconds that felt like eternity. Every second of static risked losing control entirely. Yet the drone's AI didn't panic. It simply continued reading terrain signatures and adjusting altitude based on visual landmarks, a kind of optical navigation once thought impossible for such cheap platforms. Russia's surveillance assets, meanwhile, were confused. An Orlan 10 drone circling at 1,500 meters saw only fog and water reflections. Its infrared camera detected no heat signatures, another failure caused by the dawn's cold river air masking the drone's small electric motors. In that moment, every billion-dollar piece of Russian equipment was functionally blind to a $400 adversary. Reports from DW and The Guardian later revealed that NATO intelligence centers in Romania and Poland logged the event in real time, cataloging the drone frequencies, radar sweeps, and counter-EW responses. The data, according to analysts, became a goldmine for understanding Russian vulnerability. At 05:02 a.m., the hidden Ukrainian field team near Enerhodar executed their ace move. One of them flipped a switch on a handheld black box, a short-range counter-EW device that mimicked and corrupted the Krasuka's signal. Suddenly, Russian radars filled with false echoes, their digital eyes overwhelmed by nonsense data. The operator inside the S-400 cabin muttered in frustration. His instruments now displayed hundreds of phantom blips dancing across the screen. For 30 seconds, the skies over Zaporizhzhia became a digital storm, missiles chasing ghosts, radar beams scattering like lightning through mist. And inside that chaos, the 7 true drones pressed forward toward their target, the simulation center at the plant's heart. Could Moscow's billion-dollar defense grid recover in time to stop 7 homemade machines, now flying less than a kilometer from Europe's largest nuclear reactors? The next few minutes would decide not only the outcome of this mission, but the credibility of Russia's entire air defense doctrine. By 05:03 a.m., panic had begun to spread through the Russian command post in Enerhodar. The radar operators were no longer celebrating, they were fighting ghosts. As the S-400's computers rebooted in desperation, the surviving drones closed in, weaving through radar shadows that even Moscow's most advanced sensors couldn't untangle. For Captain Sergei Mirov, the officer in charge of the plant's defense, the horror was personal. His orders were clear: defend the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant at all costs. But at all costs didn't include the unthinkable stray shrapnel striking a reactor dome. As BBC defense correspondent Jonathan Beale later noted, Russian crews faced the paradox of modern war. They were defending a nuclear asset they couldn't afford to hit. The Russian gunners hesitated. In that hesitation lay Ukraine's only chance. As the decoys were destroyed, The remaining drones darted into the blind spots between anti-aircraft turrets and reactor silos. The Mi-28 Havoc attack helicopter, scrambled moments earlier, hovered just outside the exclusion zone, its pilot sweating as he tried to line up a clean shot without risking disaster. Firing near the reactor is suicide, said a former NATO air defense officer to Al Jazeera. You can't just shoot and pray in a nuclear shadow. One drone fell to a precise burst of shrapnel from a Panzer S-1 system. Another was caught mid-air by the Mi-28's cannon. But each Russian success came with agony. Every trigger pull carried the risk of international scandal. Inside NATO headquarters in Brussels, analysts monitored satellite imagery in near real time. A classified defense news brief later confirmed that the U.S. European Command was on standby, ready to issue a nuclear proximity alert to Allied capitals if any reactor dome was breached. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians played a deadly game of resource economics. For every $3 million Russian missile launched, a $400 drone vanished, but another replaced it. The ratio was obscene, and Western observers took note. It's the Walmart doctrine of warfare, quipped one NYT columnist, where quantity and AI coordination outperform cost and prestige. At 05:03:20, the Russian defense grid finally responded with full fury. The sky erupted in controlled chaos, tracer rounds, missile trails, and blinding flashes slicing through the fog. Yet amid the storm, one drone broke formation. It dove low, banking sharply toward the training and simulation center, the operation's real objective. Inside his bunker near Orikhiv, the Ukrainian operator call sign Sokol-9 watched his feed in horror as 6 drones blinked to static one after another. The network was collapsing. Only a single icon remained, but that one icon was enough. Every swarm only needs one survivor to win, said DW military analyst Nico Lang. The last KHS-7 hugged the ground, flying beneath radar beams and avoiding tracer fire by milliseconds. Its AI was now in full autonomy mode, operating without any uplink. For all intents and purposes, it was a weapon thinking for itself. At the plant, Captain Mirov screamed new orders. Hold fire near the reactors. The very command that saved the facility from catastrophe also doomed its digital brain. His guns fell silent as the lone drone approached the third-floor ventilation intake of the simulator building, an opening no larger than a pizza box. The entire mission now rested on a target smaller than a dinner plate. Would that single autonomous machine complete what a billion-dollar missile system had failed to stop? The answer would come from inside the walls of the plant itself, where technology met the limits of human control. The final claustrophobic phase of the operation unfolded not in the sky, but inside the thin metal lungs of the plant. A single KHS-7 drone, the last surviving icon on the operator's screen, slipped through a pizza box-sized ventilation intake and began a terrifying crawl through the training center's ductwork toward the reactor simulator. What happened next combined old-fashioned reconnaissance with a new breed of surgical automation. Would you have trusted a $400 drone with the fate of a continent? This is the question the world was asking as the machine threaded a path learned from months of satellite imagery and floor plans. The Russian-installed management later confirmed that drones hit the roof of the training center, causing no major damage and no increase in radiation levels. Inside the simulator building, the drone's small, shaped charge warhead was programmed for precision to sever server racks and cripple the facility's command and control systems, not to breach reactor containment. That design choice reflected a strategic logic increasingly endorsed by Western experts: deny the enemy the brain that runs critical systems while avoiding escalation that could provoke international intervention. Analysts described the target as the plant's operational nerve center, damage the training and simulation capability. And you degrade Moscow's ability to certify operators for VVER reactors for months to come, a cost in expertise and time that money alone cannot instantly repair. The operation had been enabled by an underwater insertion tool whose reputation had grown over the last 2 years. Ukraine's Marichka autonomous underwater vehicle, covered by naval reporting as a 6-meter AUV capable of reconnaissance transport and strike tasks, had delivered the swarm to a covert perimeter just miles from the site, an evolution of Ukraine's maritime asymmetric toolkit that combined undersea stealth with airborne surgical strikes. International nuclear watchdogs reacted with alarm. The International Atomic Energy Agency has repeatedly warned that drone activity near nuclear sites creates unacceptable risks and urged all parties to keep military operations away from such facilities. That warning gained fresh urgency after the Zaporizhzhia incident, because even where radiation readings showed no release, the proximity of armed drones to reactor infrastructure exposed a fragile safety margin that regulators cannot ignore. Strategically, the strike delivered more than a temporary blackout. Moscow-aligned assessments published after the incident put rebuilding of training capability at tens of millions of dollars and projected an extended recovery timeline figures that, regardless of political spin, indicate a persistent operational deficit. Economically, the loss of a simulation hub forces reliance on distant training centers, increases travel and certification costs, and reduces throughput of qualified personnel, an attrition of competence that will be felt across reactor operations and maintenance cycles. From a NATO and US perspective, the incident was at once a demonstration and a dilemma. Western analysts watching the strike noted that cheap AI-enabled drones exposed a capability parity problem without rapid investment in counter-autonomy distributed sensors and hardened local controllers. Western defenses risk being outrun by low-cost ingenuity. Equally repeated near misses at nuclear sites complicate political support for Kiev. Each operation that eyes a nuclear facility forces allies to weigh tactical gains against strategic escalation. As the last drone's image dissolved into static on the operator's headset, the training center's digital heart went dark. The lights in one critical control room went out. Operators were forced into contingency protocols, and Moscow woke to a new reality, a gap between holding territory and holding operational control. The immediate victory was surgical, invisible, and unnerving. The larger question was blunt. How would Russia close the strategic hole now exposed at the continent's most sensitive industrial site? The aftermath arrived with a muted severity that belied its strategic weight. In the hours after dawn, Russian state media offered carefully worded denials, while technicians inspected scorched server racks and gutted simulation consoles. International monitors reported no radiological release, but the operational damage was unmistakable. The Zaporizhzhia Training and Simulation Center had been rendered largely inoperable. How far did this single surgical strike ripple through Russia's energy command net, and how quickly would Moscow move to fix the hole? Western defense analysts quickly framed the episode as a case study in asymmetric escalation. Commentators at Reuters and Defense News noted that the mission blurred traditional thresholds, no reactors were harmed. Yet Russia's ability to train and certify reactor operators had been degraded for months. A senior NATO advisor told analysts privately that the incident forced a doctrinal rethink. Air defense arrays and nuclear security protocols must now account for swarms that are as cheap as they are clever. The Trump administration in Washington, while publicly cautious, quietly accelerated contingency planning and prioritized funding for distributed counter-drone sensors. Economically, the numbers were stark and immediate. Initial independent assessments placed direct repair costs and replacement of destroyed simulation hardware in the low tens of millions of dollars, with indirect consequences for fuel handling maintenance cycles and refueling schedules across occupied plants. Analysts warned that longer qualification cycles for engineers would create a bottleneck that raised maintenance costs and increased the probability of human error effects that compound across months and years of operations. Military economists emphasized that the real cost was not only hardware, but lost expertise. Politically, Moscow adopted a two-track response, a public narrative of resilience and a private scramble to harden critical infrastructure. Kremlin briefings emphasized continued control of the plant, while back-channel reports showed an urgent effort to centralize training at distant, secure facilities and rush hardened legacy simulators into place. NATO intelligence cells quietly began modeling scenarios in which low-cost autonomy could undercut strategic centers across multiple theaters, from energy to logistics to command and control hubs. For Kyiv and its Western backers, the operation was both tactical triumph and diplomatic headache. The strike validated a doctrine favored by many NATO planners: deniable asymmetric pressure that imposes long-term costs without immediate mass casualties. Yet targeting sites near nuclear infrastructure risked eroding political support among cautious allies fearful of accidental escalation. Washington, under President Donald Trump, faced a delicate balancing act: bolster Ukraine's asymmetric advantage while avoiding a direct confrontation that could spiral beyond Kyiv's control. The strategic lesson became clear in military journals, and think tanks' vulnerability has migrated from iron to information. It is no longer enough to hold territory. States must now hold operational competence, secure supply chains, and protect digital end-to-end systems that underpin modern industry. Cheap drones and open-source AI shift the cost-benefit calculus in favor of agile actors who can exploit seams in doctrine and technology. As night fell after the operation, Moscow's hardware remained intact, but its operational rhythms were interrupted. The simulation center would require months to rebuild, and the human capital gap could take even longer to close. NATO's planners exchanged new contingencies. The Trump administration ordered accelerated funding for counter-drone networks and hardened training backups. Yet the most consequential question remained unresolved. Would this be a one-off humiliation or the opening salvo in a broader redefinition of strategic vulnerability? How will Moscow reconfigure its defenses and doctrine to protect the nerve centers of its industrial military complex? And can NATO close the gap fast enough to deter the next asymmetrical strike?